Hello, my name is Carla and I'm going to be discussing the welfare concerns associated with the everyday care and keeping of domesticated horses. So we're going to start by looking at the role and significance that horses play within society in the United Kingdom, and then we're going to have a little bit of a consideration of the required duty of care imposed on horse owners by legislation. We're then going to discuss some of the main welfare concerns. So it's not exhaustive by any means, but just have a bit of a discussion about some of the welfare concerns that are affecting domesticated horses and the barriers that there are between horses and good welfare before looking at some ways that we can maybe promote welfare amongst the equine community. Historically, horses have played a really significant role in society, and it's no different now. There are approximately over 1.5 million horses in the UK, and horses have a diverse range of lifestyles and roles within society. For example, many horses are still working horses, for example, police horses and those used in agriculture. Horses are also used quite widely in a variety of equine sports. Equestrian sports include things like racing, show jumping, and dressage, to name a few. The animals involved in these professional level eventing and sports bring with them a unique set of welfare considerations, which we'll touch on and discuss briefly later on. Horses are also kept just as pets and for general leisure purposes, for example, used in riding schools. When thinking about equine welfare and how to manage it, it's important that we look at the legality of what owners are required to do. So, the Animal Welfare Act 2006 imposes a duty of care onto owners. So, all animal owners have a legal duty of care for their horses, and this guidance says that owners need to ensure horses are provided with or given the opportunity to have the provision of a suitable living environment, a suitable diet, the ability to exhibit normal behaviour patterns, the need to be housed with or apart from other animals. So, in the case of horses, this would normally be with, as they're herd animals, and the freedom from pain, suffering, injury, and disease. Now we know what horse owners are required to do to provide their horses with the correct care. We're going to start thinking about some of the welfare concerns that face horses. So this is absolutely not exhaustive. The scope of welfare concerns go far beyond what we'll discuss today, but these are just some of the perhaps main sort of themes of concerns that might be found within domesticated horses. So we're going to look at some of the husbandry considerations that might be quite key to welfare, diet and weight management, the socialisation of horses or lack thereof, the barriers and issues facing owners when providing their horses with veterinary care, and then finishing off having a little look at some financial concerns regarding the keeping of horses. So we're going to start off by looking at some of the husbandry considerations for domesticated horses. So it is quite common for horses to be relatively overstabled. This is particularly common amongst competition horses and those used in professional sports. These horses remain in the stable for the vast majority of their time when they're not working or exercising, instead of actually being able to graze freely. Analysis of time budgets is quite a good indicator of the effect that this has on horses. Time budgets of a stabled horse will show that they spend considerably less time eating than horses who are allowed to graze. Horses are hindgut fermenters. Their digestive system is designed for them to eat little and often, constantly throughout the day. A horse at grass would spend the absolute vast majority of the day grazing, and this is not the case in quite a few studies that have looked at time budgets in stabled horses, even when they're provided with enrichment to encourage them to graze. Stabled horses are not able to exhibit those natural behaviours, and this in itself can lead to stress, health problems, and ultimately compromise welfare. It's interesting that in a study on horse owners involved in sports, the horse's living environment was ranked second lowest important factor um, in terms of the horse's welfare, this is quite significant as these horses are often exposed to extreme lifestyles simply due to the nature of their role, such as social isolation and the lack of ability to display those natural behaviours. So it's quite important to consider the effect that this attitude might have on the welfare of the horse. Another husbandry consideration is the use of rugs or blankets. Horses are often over-rugged when turned out. Quite a few factors could be at play in this. For example, weather conditions, how hardy or the breed the horse is, and whether the horse is clipped. Again, those are just lifestyle factors as to whether the horse may be clipped or not. All too often, owners might over-rug their horses, potentially through lack of knowledge of appropriate sort of rugging practice, perhaps a lack of ability or laziness to change them, or maybe interestingly, they are being treated anthropomorphically. Humans have a much narrower range of thermal tolerance than horses, so an owner might assume that if they were cold, the horse may also as well be cold. In actual fact, horses have a much broader tolerance of lower temperatures than humans do, so that might interfere with that thought pattern. Over-rugging is a health concern. It can cause interference with the horse's natural thermoregulation, can cause hypothermia, which leads to stress and discomfort, and heat stroke short term. But there are long-term problems, including weight gain, as energy is no longer being used to warm the animal, so starts being stored as fat, and it also can result in hormone imbalances. Some studies go as far as to suggest that rugs altogether are a thing that compromises welfare in horses, and one particular study suggested that horses should be free to choose how to cope with extreme weather, for example through provisions of suitable shelter options where they have the autonomy to decide whether to use them. Equine diet is a really complex area, but it's also incredibly significant when considering equine welfare, especially in domesticated populations. Horses who are stabled for long periods of time have very limited access to natural forage. Laminitis is something that really is important to consider when considering equine diet. Laminitis is an incredibly debilitating disease, which is unfortunately quite common amongst horses. One massively contributing factor to developing laminitis is diet. Obesity amongst domesticated animals is an ever increasing issue, and the same goes for horses. A significant barrier here is the lack of owner knowledge and understanding of both body condition scores and what a healthy weight on some horse breeds looks like. Obesity, like in humans, causes a variety of issues for horses, which prevents welfare concerns. In addition to sort of mobility issues, exercise intolerance, and behavioural issues, which could develop because of the weight, obesity is significantly linked to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is then in itself linked as a risk factor to many health conditions, including laminitis, as we've already mentioned, also PPID, which is pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction, or equine Cushing's, hepatic lipidosis, and osteochondrosis. All of these are going to cause suffering and compromise welfare. It's really fundamental that owners have a good understanding of not just how important nutrition is as a tool to manage and promote welfare, but also what good nutrition for their horse looks like, which should be under the guidance of an equine nutritionist. The socialisation and behavioural displays of horses is another good way of evaluating equine welfare. So, as I've already mentioned, the extreme lifestyle of some horses is often not compatible with their natural desire for companionship. Horses who are stabled for long periods of time don't have the chance to graze and socialise with other horses. They may still be able to see other horses, but that's not sufficient to fulfil their needs. This could result in displays of stereotypical behaviours such as crib biting, weaving, and windsucking. These behaviours have no purpose, that's why they're stereotypical. The only purpose they really serve is as coping mechanisms for horses who are stressed because of the environment that they're in. One particular concern about stereotypical behaviours is that owners often try to stop these behaviours, but they do so in a way that stops the behaviour from being expressed but doesn't actually fix the root cause of the problems. For example, if we look at a horse that might be crib biting, they could have behavioural issues associated with being stabled, lack of company, maybe medical conditions, or a variety of other issues that could cause the animal to become stressed and exhibit that behaviour as a defence or self preservation mechanism. Rather than getting to the bottom of the problem, some owners, unfortunately, just put in preventions in place to stop the actual behaviour. So, for example, you could use a foul tasting chemicals such as Cribox, pop that onto the area where the horse is cribbing onto, and it might stop the horse biting. However, that doesn't actually fix the issue, it just stops that expression of that behaviour, and it's just going to promote a sense of learned helplessness into the animal. The horse is still going to be suffering. They've now lost their coping mechanisms. They're going to be under further stress. The animal's going to suffer more. And so it's really important that owners understand that their horse's behaviour is simply communication and that they need to respond to it with welfare as the primary goal in how they deal with those situations. Accessing appropriate veterinary care is an inevitable and fundamental part of keeping horses healthy, but there are barriers to getting that good welfare that's associated with veterinary care. From a purely logistical point of view, there is a crisis in the veterinary industry, and that's putting huge strain on practices, for example, due to low recruitment and retention amongst veterinary professionals. Perhaps the most significant barrier, though, is inconsistency amongst owners identifying the point at which veterinary attention is needed. Owners in many studies have been found to be inconsistent with their ability to identify key clinical signs of major health conditions which require urgent intervention. A really good example of this would be colic. So, for example, many owners will be able to recognise the most common signs such as flank watching or biting and rolling. However, several studies have found owners are not good at identifying the signs of colic in the most serious of cases where it's likely to be most urgent, where treatment is required most urgently. For example, these changes might be changes to the heart rate and changes to the mucous membranes, which owners might not pick up on quite so soon, and that could be at the detriment to the animal. The cost of veterinary treatment is another really important factor, which is going to be involved in that horse accessing the veterinary care it needs, and we'll discuss the financial impacts of keeping the horse more generally. So we know that the cost of veterinary care is quite high, but actually the general cost of keeping a horse is high and is only increasing and getting higher at the moment. There is a cost of living crisis and general financial difficulty and concerns amongst owners is raising questions about the welfare of horses, as owners do have to face potentially making compromises or cuts in the horse's care purely for financial reasons. And depending on what those cuts are, it is a real possibility that that could play a serious role in reducing the welfare of those horses. For example, if an owner decides to remove preventative immunisations from the horse, that could present real welfare concerns down the line. Additionally, if owners are simply unable to continue caring for their horse, it's possible that charities might see an influx in people signing their horses over, or worst case, abandoning them if they can no longer care for them. And certainly the latter would result in incredibly significant welfare concerns and lead to serious suffering amongst the horses involved in those situations. Having now discussed some of the key considerations involved in poor welfare amongst horses, I think it's important that we look at how we can promote welfare within domesticated horses. I think first and foremost, there needs to be a really positive change in attitude and the language used surrounding welfare and lifestyles of horses, and horses less seen as commodities and more seen as individuals who experience life and experience problems and suffering within the environment around them and how that can change. Recognition of a horse's wider need to be a horse ultimately and express those natural behaviours is really, really important so that the horses have access to the things that they need to not only be physically healthy but also mentally healthy too. Of course, owners need to have the appropriate knowledge and understanding of their horse's needs and of how they can provide those things to the horse to ensure that their horses are looked after and experiencing the best welfare possible. And none of that would be possible without access to the appropriate resources, not just financially, but in terms of their lifestyle and their ability to have access to appropriate grazing and a herd and various other things that might be really, really key things that promote horse welfare. To summarise, it's important to remember that horses do remain an important part of society. There are a variety of factors which could influence the welfare of domestic horses, far beyond those that we've briefly discussed today. And just remember that owners play that vital role in improving welfare standards of their horses, and they must strive for better knowledge and understanding of their horses to be able to do this with the support of professionals in a variety of fields within the equine industry to promote welfare across horses.